I raised my son alone for 20 years. Then he found out who his real dad was, and he turned against me overnight. For 20 years, I was the only parent my son, Ethan, had. His biological father, he walked away before Ethan was even born. Never called, never asked about him, never sent a single dime. I was the one who stayed up with him when he had nightmares. I was the one who worked overtime so he could have a better life. I was the one who sacrificed everything to make sure he never felt like he was missing anything. Then, one day, Ethan found out who his real dad was. And just like that, he switched sides. Started treating me like I was the villain, like I had been the one keeping them apart. Suddenly, I was the bad guy. And his father, the man who abandoned him, he was a hero. I thought I had lost my son forever. But when the truth finally came out, Ethan realized too late that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. For 20 years, I was everything my son, Ethan, had. His biological father, Ryan, walked out the moment he found out I was pregnant. No calls, no support, no questions about his son. Just gone. And I did what any mother would do. I raised Ethan alone. It wasn't easy. I worked overtime shifts, skipped meals to make sure he had enough, and did everything in my power to make sure he never felt the absence of a father. I told him stories at bedtime, helped him with his school projects, cheered for him at every game, and taught him everything he needed to know about life. For 2 decades, I never once heard a word from Ryan, not a single text, no child support, nothing. So, when Ethan asked about his dad growing up, I kept it simple. He left before you were born, I told him, and he never looked back. Ethan always shrugged. Well, who needs him anyway? I've got you. And that was enough. But then, at 20 years old, Ethan found out who his real father was. And just like that, everything changed. It started with a random message on Facebook. I was making dinner when Ethan walked into the kitchen, his face pale, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. "Mom," he said slowly, "why didn't you ever tell me who my dad was?" I froze. My heart started pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I did," I said carefully. "I told you he left." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, but you never told me who he was." Something about his tone sent a cold chill down my spine. "Why are you asking?" I said, setting down the knife. He swallowed hard. Then he turned his phone toward me, and the moment I saw the screen, my blood ran cold. It was a message from Ryan. "Ryan, hey Ethan, I know this must be a shock, but I've been thinking about you for a long time. I made a mistake when I was younger, and I want to make it right. If you're willing to talk, I'd love to meet you." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. This man, this coward, had abandoned us without a second thought. And now, after 2 decades, he suddenly decided he wanted to make things right. I clenched my jaw. "Ethan, listen to me. That man, he's not who you think he is." Ethan's eyes darkened. "So, it's true? He really is my dad?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, but you lied to me." His voice was sharp, filled with something I had never heard from him before. Accusation. I blinked. "What? You never told me his name. You never gave me the chance to find him. You hid him from me." I felt my stomach drop. "Ethan, I didn't hide him. He left. He walked away and never came back. I didn't tell you his name because it didn't matter. He never wanted to be part of your life." But he wasn't listening. His hands curled into fists. "Maybe he didn't know how to come back. Maybe he thought you wouldn't let him. You made it sound like he didn't care at all, but maybe that's just what you wanted me to believe." I stared at him, my heart breaking. He really believed that. After everything I had done, after everything I had sacrificed, he actually thought I had been the one keeping him from his father. And at that moment, I realized I was losing my son. Ethan stared at me like I was the villain in his story, like I was the one who had kept his father from him, like I was the reason Ryan had been gone for 20 years instead of the truth, that Ryan had never wanted to be here in the first place. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Ethan, I never hid anything from you. I told you the truth. Your father left us. He made his choice. His jaw tightened. No, Mom. You told me the part of the story that made you look good. I flinched. I had never cared about looking good. All I had ever done was protect him from a man who had abandoned us. And now, he was standing here, looking at me like I was the one who had been keeping him from something important. You have no idea what you're talking about, I said, my voice steady but cold. I was the one who raised you. I was the one who stayed when he didn't. I didn't tell you about him because he didn't deserve to be in your life. Ethan shook his head. You didn't even give me the choice. I exhaled sharply. What choice, Ethan? The choice to get your hopes up? The choice to track him down when you were too young to understand what kind of person he really is? He scoffed. And you just gotta make that decision for me? Yes, I said, my patience snapping, because I was your parent, and he was a coward who left the moment things got hard. Ethan clenched his jaw. People make mistakes, Mom. Maybe he just... Don't, I cut him off, my voice shaking. Don't sit here and defend him. He wasn't some scared kid who didn't know what to do. He was a grown man who made a conscious decision to leave. And now, after all these years, he suddenly wants to come back, I scoffed. You really think that's a coincidence? Ethan hesitated. For a split second, I saw doubt flicker across his face. But it was gone just as fast. I think I should hear him out, he said stubbornly. I think I at least owe him that much. My stomach dropped. Owe him? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, he didn't do anything for you. He didn't raise you. He didn't sacrifice for you. He never even tried to check in on you. What exactly do you think you owe him? He didn't answer, because he didn't have one. But it didn't matter, because in his mind, I was the bad guy. Not Ryan, not the man who had actually abandoned him. Mister, over the next few weeks, Ethan started pulling away from me. He stopped coming home for dinner, stopped checking in. The warm conversations we used to have turned into short, clipped responses. And I knew. He was talking to Ryan. I could see it in his body language, the way he suddenly carried himself like he had answers I never gave him. Then, one evening, he came home late, his face serious. Mom, he said, his voice firm, I met him today. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. And, Ethan exhaled, he told me everything. I let out a cold laugh. Everything in one conversation. He glared at me. He told me his side, which is more than I ever got from you. My hands curled into fists at my sides. And what exactly is his side? He said he wanted to be in my life, Ethan said, folding his arms. That he thought about me every day but didn't know how to reach out. That you hated him so much you wouldn't have let him back in anyway. I took a deep breath, keeping my anger in check. He told you that? The man who never even tried to call you? Never sent a single birthday card? Never made an effort, even once in 20 years? I scoffed. And you believe him? Ethan shrugged. I believe he regrets leaving. I stared at him, feeling like I didn't even recognize my own son. You really think a man who regretted leaving would have stayed gone for 2 decades? Ethan looked away. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he thought I wouldn't want him in my life. I clenched my jaw. Or maybe he just didn't care until now. Ethan shook his head. That's what you want to believe. I exhaled sharply. No, Ethan. That's the truth. He sighed, rubbing his temples like he was frustrated with me. I'm going to keep talking to him, he said firmly. I think he deserves a chance. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling at my sides. Then I hope you don't regret this, I said softly. He didn't reply. He just walked past me, heading to his room. And for the first time in 20 years, I realized I had lost my son. Ethan stopped being my son that night, not in the legal sense, not in the biological sense, but in the way that mattered most. He started acting like a stranger in my house. Meals, he skipped them. Conversations, short, forced, awkward. He was always on his phone, texting someone. But I knew exactly who it was. Ryan, the father who had abandoned him, was suddenly the most important person in his life. One evening, I walked into the living room and saw him watching an old home video on his phone, except it wasn't one of ours. It was of Ryan, smiling, laughing, talking like he had been part of Ethan's life this whole time. Like He hadn't just popped back in after 20 years and decided to play the role of a father. I stood there, staring at my son as he watched a man he barely knew with awe in his eyes. "Are you serious?" I finally said. Ethan looked up, startled. "What?" I scoffed. "That's what you do now? Sit around watching videos of the man who left you?" His face darkened. "He's my dad." I felt something snap inside me. "No, Ethan, I am your dad. I'm the one who raised you. I'm the one who stayed. That man, he's nothing but a ghost who suddenly decided he wanted to be real." Ethan set his phone down and folded his arms. "You don't know him. He's not the guy you keep saying he is." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, really? And what exactly makes you think he's changed?" "He told me," Ethan said stubbornly. "He told me he regrets everything. That he was young, that he was scared, that he thought you wouldn't let him back into my life." I felt my fists clench. The excuses. The same pathetic excuses I had predicted. "And you believed him?" I asked, my voice low. Ethan hesitated, just for a second, but it was long enough. "You did," I said, shaking my head. "You really think a man who regretted leaving wouldn't have tried, even once, to come back sooner?" Ethan exhaled sharply, standing up. "Why can't you just accept that I want to have a relationship with him?" I stared at him, my heart breaking. "Because I know exactly how this is going to end." He frowned. "And how's that?" I sighed. "You're going to realize too late that he never wanted you. He just wanted the illusion of being a father without putting in the effort. And when the novelty wears off, he's going to leave again. And this time, when you turn around, I won't be waiting for you." Ethan scoffed. "You're just mad that I don't see you as the only parent in my life anymore." I felt my stomach drop. The only parent? I took a deep breath, fighting the sting in my chest. "You think that's what this is about?" "Yeah," he said flatly. "You want to be the hero. You want me to hate him so you can feel like you were right all along." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "I don't want you to hate him, Ethan. I want you to see him for who he really is." "Well, maybe I already have," he shot back. I exhaled slowly. "Then I hope you're ready for what's coming." He frowned. "What does that mean?" I met his eyes, my voice cold. "It means I'm done chasing you. You want him? Fine. Go to him, but don't expect me to be waiting when this blows up in your face." I turned and walked away before I could say anything else, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt like I had lost my son for good. Ethan didn't leave right away. For the next few weeks, he hovered in my house, treating me like some roommate he barely tolerated. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was always cold, short, clipped. Then, one night, he walked into the living room, suitcase in hand. "I'm moving in with Ryan," he announced. I didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't beg him to stay. I just nodded. "Okay." Ethan blinked, clearly expecting more of a reaction. "That's it?" I leaned back in my chair. "That's it. You're an adult, Ethan. You can make your own choices." He frowned. "So you're not even going to fight for me?" I laughed bitterly. "Fight for you? I already did that. For 20 years. And you made your choice." He shifted uncomfortably. I think I need to know him, Dad. I can't spend my whole life wondering what could have been." I took a slow breath. "And I can't spend my whole life waiting for you to realize the truth." His jaw tightened, like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Instead, he just nodded, picked up his suitcase, and walked out the door. I didn't try to stop him. I just let him go. For the first time in 20 years, my house was quiet. No more late-night conversations. No more soccer cleats left at the front door. No more hearing Ethan yell from the kitchen, "Dad, do we have any snacks?" Just silence. And as much as I told myself I had prepared for this, it still hurt. Days passed, then weeks. And all I got from Ethan were occasional texts. "Ethan, hey, just letting you know I made it. Ryan's house is really nice. We went out for dinner tonight. He's actually a great guy, Dad. I think you were wrong about him." I never responded. Not because I was angry, but because I knew this was temporary. I knew Ethan was living in a fantasy, and I knew exactly how this was going to end. About 2 months after Ethan moved in with Ryan, the texts started changing. At first, they were small shifts. "Ethan, Ryan's been really busy lately. He forgot we had plans today, but it's fine. I get it, he has a lot going on. Then one night I got a message that made my stomach drop. Ethan, hey Dad, can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Me, talk about what? A few minutes passed, then, Ethan, I think I made a mistake. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. There it was, the beginning of the end. I waited 2 days before calling him back. I wanted him to sit in it. I wanted him to feel the same emptiness I had felt when he walked away from me. When he picked up, his voice was quiet. Dad, he said, I don't think Ryan's the guy I thought he was. I smirked. Oh? He hesitated. At first he was great, took me places, talked to me, treated me like I was important. But lately, I don't know. It's like he's losing interest. He barely talks to me anymore. He's always busy. And when I asked him if we could do something together this weekend, he told me to figure it out myself. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. He was finally seeing it. The illusion was breaking. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly. The man who abandoned you before you were even born, the man who didn't reach out for 20 years, suddenly loses interest in you after 2 months. Shocking. Ethan flinched. I deserve that. Yeah, I agreed. You do. He sighed, sounding exhausted. I don't know what to do, Dad. I let that sit for a moment before speaking. You know what I did when you abandoned me? I asked. He swallowed hard. What? I leaned back. I let you go. Silence. I could hear his breath hitch, like he was realizing just how badly he had screwed up. And for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt in control. Because now, Ethan finally understood what it felt like to be on the other side. Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. I let the silence stretch, waiting, letting him sit in it. Because now, for the first time, he was feeling what I had felt. Abandoned, forgotten, unwanted, and that was a lesson he needed to learn the hard way. I don't know what to do, he finally whispered. I let out a slow breath. What do you want to do? He sighed heavily. I don't know. I thought he was different. I thought he actually cared. I scoffed. And you thought I was the one lying to you? Ethan let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, I did. It wasn't an apology, not yet. But it was a start. You chose him, Ethan, I said, my voice calm but firm. You made your decision. You left. You cut me out. And now what? You think I'm just going to open my arms and let you walk back in like nothing happened? He exhaled shakily. No, I don't expect that. Good, I said, because it's not that easy. He was quiet again. Then, I was stupid, Dad. I closed my eyes, rubbing my temples. Yeah, you were. I let Mom and Ryan get in my head, he admitted. I let them convince me that you were the problem. And when Ryan came back, I thought, I don't know. I thought I was getting back something I had lost. I sighed. And now you see that you never had it in the first place. Yeah. His voice cracked slightly. He never wanted me. Not really. I let that sit. Because he needed to say it out loud. He needed to understand it completely. I'm sorry, Dad, he said quietly. For everything. I leaned back in my chair, thinking carefully before responding. I appreciate that, Ethan, but an apology isn't enough. He swallowed. I know, so what now? I exhaled, staring at the ceiling. Now? You prove to me that you actually mean it. He sniffled, and I could tell he was holding back tears. I will, he promised. I swear, I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't respond right away, because this time, it wasn't about what I wanted. It was about what he was willing to do. Ethan didn't move back in right away. At first, he tried to stick it out at Ryan's house, but things only got worse. Ryan, having gotten bored of playing dad, made it clear that Ethan was nothing more than a temporary distraction. Ethan started spending more time alone, waiting for Ryan to notice him, waiting for some kind of affection that was never coming. Then, one night, he called me again. Dad, he said, his voice tired. Can I come home? I took a slow breath. You mean like how you walked out on me a few months ago? He let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, I deserve that. Damn right you do, I said. There was a long pause. Then he whispered, I miss you. That, that hit me harder than I expected, because for the first time I could tell. He meant it. I exhaled. You can come back, Ethan, but this time we do it my way. Okay, he said quickly. Whatever you say. Good, I said. Then pack your things. And just like that, my son was finally coming home. The night Ethan came home, he looked different. Not physically, he was still the same tall, broad-shouldered kid I had raised. But there was something in his eyes. Shame, exhaustion, regret. He stood in the doorway, his bag slung over his shoulder, looking like he didn't quite belong anymore. I didn't rush to hug him. I didn't say, "It's okay," or "I forgive you," because the truth was, I wasn't there yet. I just stepped aside and said, "Come in." He walked in slowly, taking in the house like it was foreign to him now. I led him to the kitchen, where we sat at the table in silence. The last time we had sat here together, he had been telling me how wrong I was, how I had lied to him about Ryan, how I had kept them apart. Now? He looked like a kid who had just learned Santa wasn't real. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I took a sip of my coffee, keeping my expression neutral. "Then don't say anything. Just listen." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm not going to make this easy for you," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You betrayed me, Ethan. You chose a man you barely knew over the parent who raised you. You threw me away like I didn't matter." He flinched but didn't argue. "I spent 20 years being your father," I continued. "And the second Ryan showed up, you erased me. Do you know how that felt?" His eyes glossed over, and for the first time in months, I saw real pain in them. "I do now," he whispered. "Good," because he needed to. "I was so stupid," he continued, shaking his head. "I don't know why I believed him. I don't know why I let him get in my head." I exhaled. "Because you wanted a father, and I wasn't enough for you anymore." His head snapped up. "No, Dad, that's not—" I held up a hand. "Ethan, stop. You don't need to explain it. I already understand." He slumped back in his chair. I wish I could go back and change everything." I studied him for a moment before speaking. "You can't," I said simply. "But you can move forward. The question is, are you actually willing to do the work, or are you just here because you have nowhere else to go?" His eyes widened. "Dad, Because if this is just about needing a place to stay," I interrupted, "then you can leave right now." He shook his head quickly. That's not it. I need you, Dad. I need my family back. I need to fix what I broke." I didn't respond immediately, because for the first time in a long time, I actually believed him. The next few weeks were slow. Ethan didn't expect things to go back to normal overnight. He didn't push for forgiveness. He just showed up. He got a job. He started helping around the house. He even joined me in the garage a few times while I worked on my car, just sitting there, talking about nothing and everything. It was like we were learning how to be father and son again. And slowly, the walls I had built around myself, they started to come down. One evening, we were sitting in the living room when Ethan cleared his throat. I reached out to Mom. I didn't react. "Yeah?" He nodded. "Told her I wasn't coming back." I raised an eyebrow. "How'd she take that?" He smirked. "She accused me of letting you brainwash me again." I laughed. "Sounds about right." His smirk faded. "I told her I wasn't a kid anymore, that I knew who really cared about me." I leaned back, watching him carefully. "And do you?" He met my eyes. "Yeah, Dad, I do." For the first time since he had walked out that door, I believed him. And for the first time in months, I felt like I had my son back. Ethan didn't just come back, he earned his place again. He didn't expect forgiveness overnight, and for that, I respected him. He worked, he helped out around the house, and more importantly, he showed up. We spent time together, little things at first, fixing the car, watching games, having dinner. It was strange at first, like we were two people who had to learn how to be family again. But the more time we spent together, the more the tension started to ease. Then, one night, Ethan asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Dad," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "can I ask you something about Ryan?" I set my drink down. "Go ahead." His voice was hesitant. "Did he ever love me?" I exhaled slowly. There it was. The question that had probably been sitting in his head for weeks. I thought about how to answer, but I knew there was no easy way to say it, so I just told him the truth. "No, Ethan," I said softly. "He didn't." He swallowed hard. "How do you know?" I sighed. "Because if he had, he never would have left in the first place. And even if he had made that mistake, he never would have stayed gone for 20 years. He wouldn't have let you grow up without him. He wouldn't have waited until it was convenient for him to suddenly want to be a father." Ethan nodded slowly, staring at the floor. "I think I knew that. I just didn't want to admit it." I leaned forward. "Why did you want to believe him so badly?" His jaw clenched. "Because if I admitted that he didn't care, then I'd have to admit that I threw you away for nothing." That hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, he got it. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "You did throw me away, Ethan." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "But," I continued, "the fact that you can admit that, that means something." He nodded, swallowing hard. I don't know how to make this right." I looked him in the eye. "You already are." His breath hitched, but this time he smiled, a small, tired, genuine smile, and I knew we were finally on the right path. A few weeks later, Ethan came to me with something that surprised me. "I want to see Ryan one last time," he admitted. I frowned. "Why?" He sighed. "I need closure. I need to tell him, to his face, that I see him for who he really is." I studied him carefully, searching for any hesitation, but there wasn't any. He wasn't hoping to fix things. He was hoping to end them, so I nodded. "All right, but you go into that meeting knowing one thing: he's not going to care. He's not going to apologize. And if you expect him to, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment." Ethan exhaled. "I know." And with that, he went to face the man who abandoned him. He was only gone for an hour. When he came back, I was waiting on the porch. He sat down beside me, let out a long breath, and shook his head. "You were right," he muttered. I didn't say anything. "I told him everything," Ethan continued. "Told him how much he hurt me, how I believed him when he said he wanted to be my dad. And you know what he said?" I didn't answer, just waited. "He just shrugged," Ethan said bitterly. Said, "Well, that's life, kid." My jaw clenched, but I wasn't surprised. Ethan let out a short, bitter laugh. 20 years, and that's all I got." I put a hand on his shoulder. "At least now you know?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, now I know." And with that, he let Ryan go. For good. That night, Ethan looked at me across the dinner table. "I love you, Dad," he said, "and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that you were the only parent I ever really had." I took a deep breath, feeling something lift off my chest. "I love you too, kid," I said, and this time, I knew I really had my son back. Some kids don't realize the value of a real parent until they lose them. Ethan thought he could replace me, that Ryan had something better to offer. But in the end, he learned the hard way that love isn't about words, it's about actions. Ryan had never done a damn thing for him, and when Ethan finally saw that, he realized too late who had really been there all along. Have you ever had to let someone go just so they could see the truth? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them.